I want to talk more about black frame insertion because I think that most people are not using it because it is not bright enough, it's too dark, uh, it crushes the shadow details, and it is understandable because out of the box you cannot use it. It is too dark, and the only way to use this Motion Pro is what I'm talking about on these OLED TVs is with this HLG trick. Basically, that's the only way. The other way is to on the service menu to change that module HDR, but that I'm not recommending that because it is pushing the panel beyond its limits basically, because it can do 400 nits full screen, so that's too much for these panels. So basically, this is the only way to use a black frame insertion with this HLG trick. Go into this secret menu, just, highlight select mode 11131111. You change this EOTF to HLG, and then you use dynamic tone mapping. That's the only way to get the brightness, and this works in terms of the visibility. This works flawlessly. You see I have native 5150. This works flawlessly in terms of the visibility. There's no dark crush. Look at this image. You would not be, nobody would believe that there is Motion Pro here. Let me show you that it is on. It is so amazing. It's bright and it is amazing. OLED Motion Pro high, no G-Sync. So this is insane, and this game is allowing me to get a locked 100 frames. So basically what I do is I use, I was trying 120, that's why I had that. So basically what I do is 100 frames. I can try 120, but it is going to drop sometimes. So you see the screen flickering. Yeah, so it is not flickering anymore. So it is gonna drop at 120 because the game is demanding. But at 100 frames, this LG C1, a black frame insertion, works flawlessly. So it works at 60, 100, and 120. So what is the difference? Why is this such a big deal? And I think that people with these LG OLEDs, if they are not using this, they are really missing out on an amazing setting. For me, this is the most important setting of this LG OLED TVs. By far is the reason why I got this C1, and is the reason why I would recommend this LG C1 before any other TV. I don't care how good it is. If it doesn't have black frame insertion at 120, I would not recommend it because this is so big, such a big deal. So we have to craft some items here. So basically, why LG is not, doesn't have a preset to get the brightness necessary for black frame insertion, why they are downgrading the black frame insertion, I don't know. It is insane because for gaming, this is like a different TV. A different TV. It's a completely different experience. So I wish they just have a setting here because this HLG trick is not perfect. And LG, I am sure LG can do better because the TV is clearly able to give you proper brightness with black frame insertion. You're just looking at it right now. This is perfect. In terms of the visibility, it's perfect, and there's no shadow detail lost or anything. So I don't know. LG should do a much better job instead of downgrading the black frame insertion like they did on the C2. That's a huge miss. There's no way I'm getting the C2 or the G2 instead of this C1, and just because of that Motion Pro. There's no way. So you would say, okay, well, 240 black frame insertion would be even better, right? Yes, it is better, but here's the problem. On a AAA game like this, Spiderman, you can barely get 120. And it's because of the CPU. It's not only the GPU. Even if it has dynamic resolution scaling, the CPU is important for black frame insertion. So you cannot get that level of performance. So 240 black frame insertion would be amazing. HDTV test showed a laptop that is able to do that, but the problem is that laptop is not powerful enough. So you can have 240 black frame insertion. It is amazing if you just evaluate the screen, but you cannot get that level of performance, so that's irrelevant. So that's the problem. 120 makes sense because there are some games where you can achieve that level of performance, like this game, for example. But you know, um, it is CPU. Is the problem is the CPU. So what I think LG should do is give you options to use black frame insertion at custom refresh rates. So if I was able to set up black frame insertion at 70 hertz, 80, 90 hertz, it would be perfect because I would be able to get no flickering on every single game. I'm sure that after 80 hertz or a little bit more maybe, there's no flickering. I'm sure, but the problem is that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. The technique, the impulse technique, doesn't work. It only works at 60, 100, and 120. So it's a shame. I think LG should focus more on this technique and make it better and give you a brightness preset to make this improve. And instead of that, they're just downgrading it, which is crazy. So yeah, man, if you have one of these LG OLEDs and you've never tried that because it's too dark, definitely definitely try black frame insertion because it's the best. So let me lower the exposure here because it's too much. So yeah, I have perfect shadow detail. It looks amazing. The colors are great. On the previous video I was showing the colors, like a reshade preset to fix the colors, but I was using color gamut native saturation 55, so that's too much. It pushes the red too far. So what I use is saturation 50, and it's not perfect, but man, for gaming it doesn't matter. The skin tones, they look good, and everything else look good, and the most important thing is I can actually get that motion resolution, and it's amazing. It's the only way to get it working. So let me know if you have any questions. I'm planning to do a video specifically talking about the differences between black frame insertion at 60, at 100, 120. How does that compare with a regular, sample and hold blurriness? Because people don't know. People don't use this technique. They just use G-Sync. And G-Sync is awesome because, you can smooth out all the stuttering. But if you can get a game like this with dynamic resolution scaling and get that frame rate locked all the time, and your GPU is always working 90% to 100%, and your CPU is working all the time, you are basically getting the highest amount of fidelity. I mean, the highest amount of pixels on the screen all the time, and the highest motion clarity. That's what you want. So there's no way G-Sync is better than this option. No way. G-Sync is a blurry mess. The only way to justify G-Sync, in my opinion, on this game, having this LG OLED TVs and having a high-end gaming PC, the only way to justify G-Sync would be to use ray tracing, because the frame rate is gonna be lower, or if the game has a great HDR, which it doesn't. The HDR is broken. So the only way to justify G-Sync is to use a great HDR implementation. So if you want to enjoy that HDR, G-Sync is the only way, because basically the black frame insertion kills the highlight details. So yeah, that's the only time when I don't use black frame insertion is if the game has a great HDR, and that is almost never, because the only two games that I've played with HDR10 is Forza Horizon 5 and Far Cry 6, aside from and Elden Ring, because Elden Ring, the frame rate is trash, and it varies a lot. It drops below 60. The performance is horrendous, and the HDR is actually very good. So I use HDR on Elden Ring, and it looks fantastic with G-Sync. I prevent that screen tearing. But if you can get this performance, look at that, 100 frames, rock solid. You want to use that. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions.